There you go.
All right, we'll go ahead and call our Thursday, April 27, 2023 Roanoke County School Board work session. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll, please?
Here.
Here. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Item 2.01, review of various construction delivery methods. RRMM, Mr. Ben Motley and Mr. Chris Phillips. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you all. Good afternoon, gentlemen, and we are happy to be here with you once again. It's always a privilege to spend the time with you and talk about the exciting things you have happening here for Roanoke County Public Schools. First, we want to say congratulations on all the achievements that have brought you to this point, and specifically the signing of an MOU and establishing a real budget for these projects. So I know getting to that point was quite the task, and took a tremendous amount of work on everyone's part. So congratulations on getting there. Now that you have that, and we've been lucky enough to assist you with some studies, both on the CTE and the elementary schools, to hopefully make some good informed decisions on getting here. The next step is, how do we make that happen? How does Roanoke County Public Schools get into delivering and building 3 projects of this magnitude? And so we understand the budgetary stipulations, how much is to be spent on each effort. And we now have a fairly good comprehension of what your proposed and ideal schedule is going to be. So with those 2 things in hand, we can now ask the question, how do we deliver it? How does Roanoke County Schools expect to have these buildings built and occupied? So you have some options available to you. I know some of you have heard a few of these before, but now it's time to make some decisions and proceed on to the next step. I'm joined with me today, Mr. Ben Motley and Michael Masheri. You have all met Michael and Ben. Michael presented, I believe, at the last work session on the elementary schools. And RRMM as a whole, we like to share these delivery methods with you, not only to help you take the next step, but also to assure you that as a firm, we have seen more of these alternative delivery methods than likely anyone else in the Commonwealth. So Ben specifically has worked through all of these, and we often say that there is a place and a project for each delivery type. I think the key and the magic is finding the one that fits your desires and goals and your budget and schedule. So without further ado, I'm going to let Ben kind of talk through some of these with you objectively, but also specifically how they might relate to your project. So Ben, why don't you jump in here?
Dive in. Okay. Well,
Before you do that,
Sure.
just to remind the board, appreciate, first of all, you all being here today. We've been through what we've sort of termed as our sort of due diligence phase with these projects, and of course, the negotiation with the funding and that kind of thing. But the due diligence phase has generated a lot of information in terms of really defining the scope to help us get that good cost estimate and so forth. Just want to acknowledge you all just a couple months ago. Also, we sort of did a preliminary review of these construction methods from Troy Smith, who's with us today, as well as Avis, who's also been a good partner. In fact, Mr. Hoyle, I believe you're from Branch, also expressed some interest a few months ago in terms of just helping us understand for ourselves what our PPEA processes are, and because this is kind of new territory for us, just reminded us that in previous projects we've kind of done a traditional design bid build approach for most of our projects in the past, and then most recently with the Waynesburg High School project, doing the design build process, which has gone really well. And that, in my conversations and study of this, looks very much like under the PPEA guidelines, which we have adopted, as a school system, as a school board, the solicited process. So we have that solicited process as well as the unsolicited, which they'll go through. But just kind of create some context here. If we've heard some of this information before, you've all had your access to the guidelines. This is complex, complicated stuff. So Appreciate everybody's attention to it. Appreciate you guys coming in and walking us through this again.
Especially appreciate the comment about it's complex stuff.
It is.
Mr. Hudson said, try to keep it simple. He said, use layman's language, and we will actually try to do that. So let's kind of dive in. So first of all, often we have had the opportunity to present similar presentations through the Virginia School Board Association and many other school boards around the country, around the state. And most of the time we're doing that, we're kind of giving them just general information about the options. In this case, you have your funding, and you may or may not know this, but perhaps you'll understand it by the end of this work session today. You are on the cusp of being able to take advantage of a critical schedule opportunity. If you do not move ahead deliberately and make these decisions soon, in our opinion, and we can show you, you risk losing the really valuable summer of 2024 to really get these things moving. Now, in this market, time is dollars. And so you already have a budget. This is not making an editorial comment about your budget per se, other than it is less than what the studies revealed, right? So it's more and more of a challenge. So all the more adopting a schedule and approach that will give you the most ultimate value, we think is important. So is it the best, is there just out of the gate, is there a best choice in terms of the delivery method? Well, we always say it depends. It depends on the specific circumstances. It depends on market conditions. And when we say market conditions, we mean what is happening in the construction market. We are in an unprecedented, inflationary, and unstable market. That's going to affect a lot of what we would say about these choices. What about your financial constraints? Do you have flexibility to a year from now, if you get bids in to, oh, well, instead of 130 million, we really need 140? I don't think so. We're understanding you have a fixed budget. What about your schedule goals? Well, any public school needs to carefully time the completion of projects that work with the academic calendar. What about your school system staff, their level of experience, their bandwidth to handle these? Which one of these methods work best there? What about project complexity? The Code of Virginia explicitly talks about that, really, in particular for design, build, and construction management at risk, that project complexity should be one of the justifications, to use that. You have a complex project here, by the way. What about renovation versus new? Some of these methods kind of lend themselves better as to whether you are doing a renovation versus a new school. You're doing both in this case. So what about that? And then what about the scale of the project and attracting interest? So again, this is a very complex topic. And don't be discouraged if you have to kind of ask a question or ask a question again, because I've been in the business for over 40 years, and I've been working in these project delivery methods for 20 years. And I still have to carefully step back and look at all the pieces of the puzzle. It doesn't necessarily come quickly. So give yourself that latitude there. Now, in addition to recommending that you be very deliberate and try to do very soon a selection on which project delivery method to use, the other, we think, critical decision is to decide whether to bundle these projects together or to separate these projects. Are they 3 separate projects? Are they the new CTE and maybe as separate as the 2 elementaries? Or are they completely 3 separate? That is also, in our opinion, going to be a critical decision that you need to make. And we do believe that there are some pretty things to strongly say which direction you should go. Now, here they are. In in Virginia, the Code of Virginia allows public schools as local public bodies 4 options for construction delivery. And by the way, in terms of terminology, they're called construction delivery options, they're called procurement options, whatever. Lots of different terms are used for these things. Number 1 is design, bid, build. That is what we're going to refer to now in the rest of this presentation. We're going to call it the traditional method. And the reason we're going to call it traditional is because the language of it is very similar to number 3, which is design, build, right? And people often get those terms confused. But in number 1, the hyphens are indicating a chronology, right? You're going to design it first, you're going to bid it next, and then you're going to build it. That is the traditional method that you all have used for years, except for William Byrd. Number 2 is, and number 1 has been around forever, right? BC, right? Longstanding method of procuring projects, particularly for public entities. Since 2002, there has been what's called the PPEA. That stands for Public-Private Education Act. At that time, the state legislature was considered fairly progressive in that they offered this option. And we're going to get into that. PPA, again, stands for Public-Private Education Act. And then number 3 is design build. Now here the hyphen is indicating a compound term. That means you're going to have a one singular entity that's going to do both the design and the construction under contract with you, a single contract. And then what's probably the least familiar to you is number 4. And that is what's termed as construction manager at risk. It's also sometimes referred to as CMAR. It is also sometimes referred to as construction management at risk. And the Code of Virginia recently just decided to call it construction management. It can be very confusing, but those of us that are in the industry add the term at risk because it's very important. That means that the construction manager is actually the builder who has taken the financial risk to build the project. Versus there are many other firms out there that are referred to as construction managers that just provide third-party consulting to you or to other entities. But they are not at risk, they are just a consultant. So that's why we keep, in our presentation, we keep that term at risk so that it's clear what we're talking about. Now, number 3 and number 4 have been around only since 2017 for public schools. These delivery methods have been around in real life, in the private and other scenarios for a very long time. They're not like brand new, but they are new for public schools in Virginia. Now, items number 2 through 4, PPA, design, build, and construction management risk, they are referred to often as the alternative delivery methods or alternative procurement. All 3 of those offer a collaborative approach with a comprehensive team and early construction price commitments. They all 3 have that option, similar to what you had with William Byrd. And oftentimes they will have a mechanism referred to as guaranteed maximum price or GMP. So that's some of the language. Now, in this particular market, that's extremely important because the traditional, with this unstable market that we're in, it is very challenging for an owner to wait maybe a year from now, having spent all this time in investing in design and so forth, when you've got a fixed budget and you have a challenging schedule, that it may not be until then that you find suddenly there is a major bust, right, in the price. Not only that, it is very challenging for people like Branch and Avis, who are represented in this room, because of the instability of the market, because of vendor availability, product availability, and the stability of even getting price commitments. It's even more risky for them than ever before to make that low bid price. Not that it can't be done, not that it's not still done, but it is a more challenging environment. So when we were, based on those reasons, when we were discussing this with Mr. Kegels and Dr. Nicely the other day, Dr. Nicely, I think your word was you kind of were thinking that the traditional method was off the table. That because you understood these dynamics and the risk really for the county school system to actually have a traditional method. So I'm going to add another thing, and then we're going to look at why, we're going to try to reinforce the point why we think you should avoid the traditional method under these circumstances. Now, one thing else about these alternative delivery methods is that they require the adoption of guidelines and they require unique procurement timelines. It's another part of the complexity. Now, you, as a school system, already have PPA guidelines. That's good. You also already have adopted design build guidelines. That's good. What you don't have is CM at risk or CMAR guidelines. You don't have those right now. So although there's many advantages to that particular method, it has at the moment the current disadvantage of time that you haven't adopted them and you have to go through that process.
Chairman, could, in the interest of time, and I'm just throwing this out to everybody on our board, I don't even know that we need to spend time on design bid build unless somebody feels like they need to. So if you were going to speak to why we shouldn't, I think we got that in the last project we did that way. And so I think. Case Spring? Yeah, so I think.
Well, I agree. Just to throw out there for the group, and one factor, first of all, experience, but also, one of the questions I asked was, under what circumstances would that be advantageous? And, it seems to be when the market conditions are very stable, there could be an advantage there. That's sort of not the case here. So I agree.
And I'm honestly, and maybe some of the experts here would tell me I'm a little bit off, but what we went through and the headbutting and some of that stuff, I would, and the design build, what we've done on Bird has been phenomenal. That would just be my recommendation, not to,
Well, I candidly, I don't have much time dedicated to it.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I thought I could quickly demonstrate that it wasn't an advantage.
Good, okay.
Now, in fact, well, let's just one more point, that method is a use by right. You don't have any special procedures there. But if we go to this, if we have analyzed a preliminary schedule for the traditional method, and the bottom line is, it would be probably June or July before you knew what your price was. And it just doesn't make sense in this market. So I'm going to keep moving.
Okay.
Now, with that said, I am going to take a moment to describe what is at the core of the traditional method, so that as we compare it to the others, you will see the differences. It doesn't take long. Now, in contractual language, in any construction project, we have three primary players. They are referred to in contract language as the owner, that's Roanoke County Public Schools, the architect, and that means the engineer and all the consultants and so forth, and the term contractor is often used. You typically have a contract with the architect, and you have a second contract with the contractor, and the architect is the one that creates the legal contract that you have with the contractor. The drawings and specifications are that legal contract. The key is, when it comes to selecting an architect, by law, you cannot select by price. You have to select by qualifications, and then you negotiate your contract. If you select an architect and then their price is too high, you have the ability to go to the next one, but you cannot select on price alone. When it comes to traditional procurement, by law, doesn't matter what the reputation of the firm is, doesn't remember whether you like them or not, doesn't even count on how much experience they have. If they submit a responsible, properly bonded, low bid, that's who you must select. Now, not spending much time on that, but ask yourself this question. in any typical project, where does the money go? The money goes, 85% of that money goes into the hard cost or the construction. The soft costs for design, equipment, and contingencies are other. So that means you're forced into that environment in the traditional method to select someone only on price. Now, I'm moving quickly then to, now we're gonna actually couple and look at design, build, and PPEA at the same time. We're gonna do that at the same time because, as Dr. Nicely was indicating, particularly the solicited method for PPA and design build, they are very close cousins. Now, we will get to later on some nuances that do start to separate them. But at the core, and I think you understand this, you as the owner, you end up having one contract with the contractor, and the architect is usually a sub-consultant to the contractor. And here, though, the great advantage is that now you can pick this overall team, not almost the entire value of the project based on qualifications, their reputation, the product they're offering for the money charged. You are not constrained to the lowest price. You can use a best value approach. Now, the law also, though, requires you to have competing proposals. That's so you couldn't just go pick your buddies and negotiate a price, right? And, well, these are my buddies, and that's who I'd like to pick. And you experienced that with the Williamsburg project. In fact, we were a competing team. We did not prevail, but we competed there. Now, one of the questions, or one of the things that often comes up, and it's another piece of the puzzle, is because the architect is under the direct employ of the contractor, there is the potential conflict of interest, because normally the architect is guarding your interest. So many public school systems will feel like they're not required to, that they would need a third-party consultant to evaluate the proposals and to guard their interest independently. So it's potentially another expense. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, jumping quickly now to what about the schedule impact? And remember, in our view, the schedule for these is a very important consideration from you. If we look at just at design build for a minute, you have the opportunity to actually, through this process, to have a construction manager, firms like either Branch or Avis or others, to be fully engaged or to really be engaged in the details by possibly as early as mid-June. Now, we think that's a tremendous advantage for you all. The sooner we can get a firm with construction expertise involved in the real market conditions about pricing for these, the better, particularly for the elementary schools. And this is why. It's easier to deal with the pricing and the scope of work for a new project. You know that everything's included. And also, we also know right now that based on some recent reprogramming for the CTE Center, the program and the budget, which must be at least $80 million, is starting to align pretty well. We're very encouraged about recent efforts there. If you recall, the elementary schools, we were really looking at north of $60 million to produce the kind of projects that would be really best, right? But we have 50, so now there's a big challenge. It's harder to define the scope in renovations, and it's also more difficult to price these. So again, the engagement or an Avis Branch or comparable firm as quickly as possible is an important component in this process. So design build starts to give you that opportunity, maybe if you really keep moving very deliberately, maybe as early as mid-June.
Of this year. And if you recall, design bid build, you were probably going to be looking at June or July of '24 before you had a builder with a price.
One quick question I noticed at the bottom. Under design build, it's 28.5 months. The last slide for design bid build was 24 months. What's that?
Well, it's just, again, so all of these are targeted by trying to give you substantial completion by the summer of 2026. That's a good question. I should have pointed that out. So not only with the traditional method do you potentially have a bus at your price, right, a year from now, but you also have less time to actually even build the project.
Okay.
You're not able to as readily engage. Gosh, there's so many details we could go over, but not only do you get that construction expertise engaged earlier, but you also, with this and any of these alternative methods, you have the ability to do what's called early packages. Things like an early site package, which would be really very helpful, for example, at the CTE project. You would have the opportunity to do early foundations and steel for the CTE Center. You would have the opportunity, depending on what to do, for example, depending on what we have to do regarding the bus loops and the traffic and so forth at the elementary schools, to do an early package and actually really leverage the critical summer. So all of these, the ability to have early packages is another significant advantage for both pricing and being able to accomplish the completion by the summer of 2026. You followed that so far? So now, one of the things that is not necessarily obvious here, and it would take a fair amount of detail to go through, and by the way, we can come back and look at these in more detail, but I think it might be best to kind of hit these at a higher level first and then come back. You see in the comment there we have on the upper right, it says that, you could possibly have an initial GMP, or what's also sometimes termed as a CCL, which means construction cost limit, by possibly as early as October 2023. But we say, is that overly ambitious? It is a very ambitious undertaking, and it's also, in our opinion, very ambitious for your own staff. Because in order for you all to use the design build delivery method, you have to right away issue an RFQ, and then you've got to be being prepared. There's a two-stage process. You do request for qualifications. You must allow at least 30 days for that. You get submissions from firms. They give you your qualifications. You narrow the process, you shortlist to firms, and then they have to go through a request for proposal phase where they're providing much more detail. They're starting to provide pricing information like you experienced at William Byrd. The challenge here is that all of this requires a lot of immediate work on your behalf. And someone like RRMM really can't assist you. Although we know a lot about this and our heads have been in the weeds of this, because we would want to be able to do it, we cannot participate because we would need to be excluded. And you would not only, if you believe a third party is needed, either for the entire project or just to assist you to be able to get all this together, you would need to get that RFP initiated right away and get that moving. And what happens is, in our opinion, this is a pretty ambitious schedule, and it's potentially overly leveraged. It doesn't have much room for error.
Can you speak real quickly to are there individuals or are there companies that do the third party? And I'm not asking you for a fit, but I mean, are we looking at 2% of the project? We looking 5%? I don't know what. What some method of
It depends a lot on what you have them do. Mm-hmm. And we could refer you to some folks, and they could give you some fee ranges. There's everything from, do you just kind of have them do clerk of the work type services versus kind of advising you from front to back.
clerk of the work being invoices and
Just helping guard your interest on a daily basis once it's under construction.
okay.
I don't know that I have a formula I could give for.
Just curious.
Yeah, it's gonna depend on the scope of work you anticipate, but it's been said, there are many agencies out there that provide this, and some have done it here locally very successfully. Be happy to give you several to call and talk to if you'd like.
Folks like Madonna Boyer Peck, Scansco, those are two
Okay.
that come to mind right away.
Is there cases where you've seen that was beneficiary necessary, or is it just something that you just gotta safeguard insurance?
I think it depends on you. I mean, we are just wrapping up a major new middle school in Campbell County, which was done by PPEA. And they've had enough confidence in our team and the reputation of the contractor. They didn't feel like it was necessary. They only hired a third party to do the clerk of the works piece. And so that happens. So part of it, again, depends on your staff's experience and your staff's bandwidth and your comfort level with the team. That's why we say it's optional.
Just internally, we have talked just to prepare for today about how many moving parts and pieces there are inherent in all three of these projects, and then you put them together. How do you manage that process? And so that bandwidth really becomes a big question. Internally, handling all those parts and pieces really becomes a fairly laborious task and rather detailed.
And Ken, maybe this is something you can reach out to Richard and ask what the county, because they've built quite a few buildings over the last few years to kind of see, because I know they've helped us with some projects that we've got coming up.
That's a good idea.
So they may be
And
able to
the
help us.
reason I say that is with the money we're, and we didn't do this on Bird, right? And we've had moving parts internally, with Todd coming on and folks leaving, and in the best discretion of looking after taxpayer funding and money, it's almost to me, and again, this is just thinking outside the box, not saying that this is something we absolutely want to do, but to me, it's almost egregious not to have somebody looking after our behalf. Just my thoughts.
Just like a clerk of the works?
Yes, yes.
I mean,
somebody.
not intense, but maybe just somebody.
But again, that's,
All right, how is the project going? Are they doing what?
The one up in Campbell County, they love it.
Do they?
Yeah, it's wrapping up. In fact, it involved all the complexities of an existing school on a site and phased occupancy and living in the existing building, all those kinds of things.
well, we've been extremely pleased with the Bird project too, and that don't construe what I'm saying as, we worry about the quality or something like that, but I think they have the expertise that we wouldn't have to follow a project, and it's not to protect us, well, it is protect us, but it's more, I think, protect our citizens' investments and to make sure that we're, staying on top of the project.
So I think it's particularly necessary for you to do that, at least during construction, to have some daily eyes and ears that are under your direct contract to do that. In fact, that even happens in the traditional method.
Sure, that's why I say that.
I think that our experience is varied. It depends on how much authority you give them in this overall process. Where there have been many cases where it has been excellent to have a third party involved, because they've helped the owner. And there have been other cases where we wish it wasn't another extra layer we had to deal with.
Sure, and I get that. I understand. I mean, good and bad, and
Right.
you hope you get somebody that can work together well
Right.
and all that. Yeah,
That's right. So any process can have good and bad. There's no magic, right? It's about getting the right people on board.
And I'll just add, Mr. Greenway, so this is multiple projects too, right? Not just one. So Campbell County, Williamsburg is one project. We have a PPA in Danville that is exactly that. It's multiple projects. It's actually two different design build companies that are on those two different projects. And they did a third party, and it has worked out well throughout the process to represent the owner and balance between those two projects advocating for the owner.
good. Thank you. Yeah, and that's down the line, obviously, but something to think about.
Well, and I know when we did Cave Spring with Troy and his group, Avis, we had our person on site every day. And that was really difficult for the rest of the things that were going on in the county, but we did our, you know, our Todd Kegels, it was Chris Lowe then, but, you know, out there
That's a
all the
good point.
time. So he was,
Couldn't do anything else.
right.
And that's gonna be we've got a lot of challenges.
Yeah, if it's just on the construction side, you've got plenty of time, right, to address that. The more pressing thing is what about?
Get started, yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
Now, what about PPEA? So we look at that schedule, and they're very similar. In that when you, except you have the opportunity now, you start to see some separation in that we're seeing that you're getting the engagement of these PPA teams early enough, certainly much earlier than the traditional method, right? A little bit later for the PPA, depending on how you go through the process. And we're, like design build, we're also able to do the early packages. We're able to get this done in such a way that could really take beneficial advantage of the summer of 2024. What you potentially have though here, and I'm going to come back to it, is what the differences are between what's called a solicited PPEA versus an unsolicited PPA. So before getting into those details, so far we're kind of showing that PPA and design build are pretty similar, right? The third party question is pretty similar as well. But let's go to construction management risk and then we'll circle back. So what about construction manager at risk? This is pretty interesting. When you look at the diagram, you start to see that it has a lot of similarities to the traditional method, right? You've got the owner having a separate contract with the architect and with the contractor. But here's the big difference, is that now you have the opportunities to select both, again, by law, you have to select the architect based on their qualifications and their ability and experience and so forth, because it's protecting the health, safety, and welfare. But now both entities you can select based on reputation, based on value. It's not low price driven, right? But here's the difference, and you're still required to have a competing proposal process. So, and competitive negotiation. So sometimes we show this to people, they go, wow, all the advantages without the disadvantage of the potential conflict of the architect working for the contractor. But here's the thing, you must select the architect first. And then the architect must advise you on the suitability of using this method. And then you use the architect, but the thing is, the architect doesn't really dive into the design and do all the work, because very quickly as you can, you try to go through this process of getting the contractor on board. And you select them on terms of their approach, maybe their approach to general conditions, overhead, and profit, their costs for insurance and so forth. And then you can treat the entire rest of the hard cost as kind of a reimbursable or negotiated item. You can use a guaranteed maximum price approach. And the thing that's powerful about this is that when it comes to developing contract number 2, which is, all right, what is really the design, what is the specification, what is really in the project, is that it becomes this very collaborative approach between the owner and the contractor and the architect to develop this. All the pricing is open book. You get to see all the estimates. You get to see the pricing that's come. You don't even, as with all these methods, you're not even required to take the lowest price estimate of a particular subcontractor. If you had a bad experience with another subcontractor, or you felt their team is much more qualified, you have all the advantages of using them. So if we were If we were having this conversation 3 to 4 months ago, we would be saying, gosh, there's some pretty compelling reasons to use construction management risk. The problem is that you don't have your guidelines adopted. You have to go ahead and get an architect on board. You've got to go through that RFP process. And by the time you do all that, as good as this process is, you don't get the Avis or the branch or whoever. I'm using them because they're in the room. You don't get their expertise really engaged until September of 2023. And that, as powerful as that model is, that makes this more vulnerable. Is it doable? Does it also relieve a lot of the burden on your staff of managing all the complexities of this? Yes, that also does too. For example, if you selected us as the architect to do that, and again, you'd have to go through an RFP process, or someone else who is qualified like we are, that has a lot of experience with this method, and that's one thing we would certainly suggest. You just, a lot of time goes by. And the nice thing about this process is you can hire us to help you select a contractor or any architect. We're not excluded from assisting you with the whole thing. But again, what happens is, see where that green bar is right there in the middle, where it says the CMO's on board by mid-September, and then it says initial GMP by early November, and then overly ambitious. That just puts a tremendous burden on the entire team to really able to accomplish that. And you have to do it by then to be able to leverage the early packages and to really get the whole thing under final contract. Enough time to say, yes, we are now moving from pre-construction to construction, and we can accomplish all of this. So what it does is it starts to point us back to, in my opinion, or our opinion, to either design, build, or PPEA. We're going to pause for a second to see if there's any questions, and then if you agree, we'll start to pick apart now. What about trying to discern between those two?
One question. They both, you're able to select the contractor, not the lowest bid.
For all of these alternative methods?
For all of those?
Yes.
Okay. Good point. I mean, that's a good.
Yeah.
You ask, you're able to accept any contractor, is what you're, okay.
Now, you are required that price be a factor, but it is not the
Determination.
is not the full determination.
Right. Do you have something, Dave?
Nope, not yet.
Okay. So another piece of the puzzle of the moving parts is what's called, under PPEA, is that you have what's called an unsolicited or a solicited. Now, with a solicited, again, it's just extremely similar to the design build. You go through a process where you're putting together, solicited means you as the owner are putting together a request for proposal for a conceptual phase PPEA. And depending on the circumstances, what most often occurs is that that initial proposal is oftentimes heavily qualification based. It's kind of narrowing down the teams that you think can do this project. And depending on the circumstances, it may start to get into design concepts and preliminary pricing for what's called the conceptual phase. And then you go through typically a second, you would shortlist, you would see who would respond. You would either pick 1, 2, 3, depending, to continue on into what's called a detailed phase. And then the detailed phase, there's more information about the design concepts, the specific cost of the work, the specific scope of the work, and then you ultimately get to a singular selection you select a team, you negotiate either a comprehensive and interim agreement, and you move forward. And by the way, with all these alternative methods, you have the ability, when you make the initial selection, and until you get to a point where you've got an upper end contract limit that's clearly defined, you have the ability to back out, right? You always have the ability to back out and go to a different method or change your mind. The problem is you don't have the budget or the schedule to provide for that back out, right? We would want to, anybody would want to do this as carefully as possible so that you're creating the highest assurance of success and that you're going to be able to move forward. Now, in an unsolicited proposal, that is when a team, typically a team of a builder and an architect, decide they're going to work together to provide to you a proposal unsolicited. You did not formally request it. But that team is watching what's going on, they see what you need, and they say, we're going to give them a proposal for them to respond to. And you have the ability to review that proposal and take no act, decide you're not interested. You have the ability to say, yes, you're interested, we're going to accept it, and we're going to advertise for competing proposals. Or you have the ability to say, we'd like you to consider these modifications and then have them modify it and submit another proposal. Or even you might say we're going to accept it, but tell all the teams we would like these modifications in any additional proposals. So there's a fair amount of flexibility. The big advantage of this is that, and this is the if you have qualified teams that are motivated to do this, and by the way, it is a fairly substantial risk for these teams to do this. We've done a lot of these. It can easily get into six figures in terms of our investment at risk to even go through this proposal process. So the things that PPA teams look for is there a commitment for the funding, for one? And so you already have that. So that is a fairly large inducement to any of the teams that are either will listen to this presentation or are sitting in this room right now, because the funding is there, right? But what the teams will also look for in order to take this risk, where do you stand? Are you ready to commit to a project delivery method? And are you really interested in an unsolicited PPA? Because that's what I'm quite candidly, we are prepared to engage as a team on that. But we're looking to see what will the school board do in terms of the decision. Now, again, it could be all of this discussion is not, any of it, in my opinion, is not designed to create any unfair advantage to us. We are making this presentation in a public setting. But this is the kind of thing the teams will look for. And so if we see that, yes, you're very interested, you've got your funding, you've got you're interested in receiving a proposal, you might end up receiving more than one proposal. But what will happen, and this is kind of what it boils down to, is that those teams that are committed are interested, if they will take on the challenge of trying to figure out what to do about the elementary schools.
About the what?
About the elementary schools. Because right now, remember, the macro level study we did for you presented a budget that was much higher than what you had. So the trick is, you have to spend at least 80 on the CTE. You've got 130 total. If you don't do a process that allows you to really get the schedule moving, you're going to potentially lose more value by extending the schedule. The biggest challenge that's facing this entire project right now is what to do about the elementary schools, to getting you a quality project for $50 million. So you need teams that will get in and really figure out what options are and what the real costs are to do those options for the elementary school. And you need that to happen as soon as possible.
Really quickly, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. So, having said that, and y'all have certainly worked on schematics and conceptuals, would other firms and architects have the ability to use their public documents, right?
Oh, yeah.
Would they have the ability to look at those documents to
They
make?
absolutely do, because you
Okay.
pay for them.
Yep, to make those, I just want to make sure everybody's on a plan. I want to get, look, when you say is the school board open to it, I know one of us is open to it, and I think, more of us are open to it to get things moving. We know what we've got to work with. I hate the way government does this, because we say, hey, here's the money we got, build us something for that, it's just a terrible way to do it. But yes, so I just want to make sure that everyone has a level playing field, that they could go in and say, look, that there's not a time frame we need to give competing firms, architects, the ability to go in and have that period to do that. But, being that it's a public document, I would assume they have the ability to go in and get
Well,
those.
we'll go even one step further. So on our own dime, we met recently with your CTE committee and forged a new program, right, that is much closer to the budget. We have said, even though we did that, you have full right and access to use that. It's only in your best interest to
Okay.
distribute that information.
Thank you.
And the thing is, quite candidly, is we have to start over on looking at the elementary school.
So that was going to be my next question. Has
And-
any work been done or any thought been given? And maybe this is not you tell me, Dr. Nicely, if I get off schedule or Mr. Chairman, but has any work went into, because I know the elementaries are the bugaboo, has any, and we know we're squeezing that thing down, what's the old saying, squeezing a nickel to hear the buffalo or something, whatever that is. Whatever it is, I don't know what it is.
Blood out of a turtle,
Yeah,
something like
blood
that.
out of a turtle, that's good enough. But we know that, it's going to be challenging to get those schools done with the money we're given. But has any work went into that already to?
Well, yes, but we're not gonna tell you what it is.
Okay.
So that's our risk.
But that's
our
a good,
advantage.
but that's a good thing,
Yeah.
to me.
But
That's what I'm hearing.
just to remind everybody, we've already done the, the concepts in terms of square footage, in terms of renovation. We've got that initial price of around 30 million, but in terms of how to get that down to 25.
Well, but that's what I'm asking.
Right, I
And
know,
think-
but just to remind everybody that we've
Yeah,
done.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
so-
the challenge that any team decides to pursue this is gonna see immediately.
Right.
And they're gonna have to take it upon themselves to find.
Yeah, you're not gonna do it for me. No, I get that, but it's encouraging that you've taken that step. is
We
what I'm
have.
saying.
Well, we're in the midst of it.
Right.
But but candidly, we're also, again, there's a lot of effort there. We're waiting to see what the board will do about this. And any team would be waiting to see what the board's gonna do. about
Well, so
this.
correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I don't understand just a little bit of this unsolicited PPE. Couldn't you, do we have to proclaim that we're doing a PPE to get you to
No.
get on, so you could turn this in with whether we were receptive or not? Now, I get that you would obviously be more
Well,
advantageous.
yeah, I mean, we've also been through, doing this for over 20 years, we've also been through the school of hard knocks. We've been exercised. Well, they said, yeah, we're interested, and then later on, oh, no, thank you.
Right.
And so we look to see that I just don't think you have the liberty to be, this is my opinion, to be very wishy-washy.
Yeah.
Because you're going to need, in order to get this early engagement, you've got the big piece of inducement, that is the approved budget, but you're also gonna, I recommend that you be very clear in your signals of what you'd like to do.
We've been boxed in a bit, is what
Yeah.
you're saying, and I get it. I get that. But by the same token, I think we're very open. You know, the negotiations, I'm sure you've heard, you know, some of the commentary, which I'm probably the owner of some of that. But, but the reality is, to get to this point, we had to do that. We
Yes,
had
that's
to. So we, are, as a board, are very open and ready to move this process forward. And we realize through Dr. Nicely's leadership and Mr. Cagle's that time is of the essence. So as I've said many times in those engagements, I don't want to be dead before these projects are done. So I think, you know, time is obviously a big factor. So we appreciate that you're here. We appreciate that you've engaged and brought the information forward, and we appreciate what you're doing today.
Yeah, if when we saw that the MOU had been reached, I thought, wow, okay, this project has a chance. If it had happened 3 months from now, it would
Just be tough.
it'd be really tough. We just happen to be on this critical cusp, in our opinion, of
Yeah,
time.
I agree.
Mr. Ray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you're looking at, you know, the elementary schools and you look at them from a standpoint of what is the need, and you've got, you know, 25, you know, or it could be that you see a more need that it would be 30, 25 or something?
Or, yeah, 28
28 or
and
something?
whatever, yeah, I understand, right. It's likely that they will not be exactly the same.
Right. And one other question, which is probably a dumb question, but to understand the process, once a contractor gets it, it'd have different builders, and you got 3 projects going, and I think you mentioned that earlier about other projects. How are they gonna find the workers to get it done?
Well, that's if you'd like, that's a great segue into the next part of the conversation, that is, do you bundle these projects or not? And if you all would like, we're certainly glad to go there now.
Absolutely. In fact, I kind of thought that's what we were doing. I may have misunderstood, but.
Yeah.
Well, it is.
Well, it's where we are in terms of, you know,
Well, let's make the case.
We want all 3
Okay.
projects to go
Yeah,
forward.
right.
Okay, so barring no questions, kind of back to this question. Let's look at this. Let's look at this bundle or separate question. We're going to talk. We see. You know, again, if this were 4 months ago, I think this project would actually been a great candidate, that you did the CTE under one contract and the elementaries under another. But that was also before knowing the budget constraints and the fact that you've got to kind of work them together, right? It's got to work within the 130. So there are, in our opinion, significant advantages to bundling all 3 together. Number one is your financial constraints, right? You've got the 130, you've got to spend at least 80 on CTE, and if you end up having separate teams and separate contractors, and yet you're constantly trying to see where the pricing is and where are they going, it's like you'd almost have to find yourself, if they were separated, you'd have to find yourself repeatedly stopping, oh, wait a minute, we got to go over and see where things are on the other team before we know how to move. The other thing is the staff efficiency question. For your own staff, it is going to be much more challenging for you all to be, in our opinion, to work with 3 or 2 entities instead of one team, comprehensive team working with you. The other thing is managing trades. Now if we have the opportunity to come to the table, we've already decided that our team player will be Branch. And we have really asked Branch about this question of what about the builder's perspective? Is it too much for you to take on all 3? Is it better to have all three. And they're pretty clear, and they can speak to this if you'd like, but when it comes to even managing all the trades, remember, we're in a market, we have been in a market where people have been very busy. They kind of have to be induced, they want to take the most attractive projects. And if you have three major projects and they're trying to decide, well, which one do we get involved in and which contractor is leading one, and we're not sure if we're going to do this one until we know about getting this one. If you have a single entity coordinating and trying to incentivize and figuring out what trades are doing, or maybe this mechanical contractor, gosh, we'd really like to do the CTE, but really we're not that, having a single entity to manage all those dynamics will not only make for a more attractive PPA pursuit at risk, but will also be much more practical in the delivery.
More cost effective.
And if you can make it, so a lot in this market, it's a lot about getting interest, right? If you can attract interest, then people really want the project, you're gonna have better pricing. If it's convoluted, if it's complicated, if there are so many parts, in our opinion, it's gonna discourage interest. Or if they're not sure, there will be a tendency, in our opinion, for there to be higher numbers, right? So anyway, I think from my perspective, it's almost like a compelling reason to bundle. Here's another thing, equally as weighty. If you understand the mechanics of how a guaranteed maximum price contract delivery method works on your watch.
Siri doesn't have an answer, but Ben Motley does.
What is it that allows an Avis or a branch to provide a guaranteed maximum price when the project is not fully detailed and developed? It's not hard bid to the trades. One of the key mechanisms that makes any of these alternative delivery methods work is how you handle what's called the contingency. When you're early in the process, you have all this pricing, but you have to, earlier on, you have to you have to create a contingency fund that these builders have the ability to access because they can't anticipate everything. We can't, as designers in the early stages, can't anticipate everything.
Sir, can I ask, but with 80 million of it, or on one project, it's gonna be brand new, so there wouldn't be contingencies for that, would there?
Sure, because you
I
remember
get the
you're.
rock, I get some of the rock.
Well,
quotes on that.
but remember, you're trying to get an upper limit price commitment early on when the documents are not fully developed and detailed and you don't have hard bids from subcontractors. So they're getting pricing estimates and everything, but you can't cover everything. Not everything's designed. Not everything can be fully priced. So there needs to be a contingency to address for those unforeseens that any team can figure out.
Yeah, your team is giving you a price long before the full clarity of the documents are completed.
See, that's a little bit concerning to me.
Just to clarify, there's a contingency on the contractor side.
Yes.
That's probably what you're referring to. And we probably have our own contingency. Those are two different things. So even like on our current Bird project, Avis has a contingency
We have a
built
little
into their
piece of
budget.
it, yeah.
And I think that's what you're referring to.
It's
Yes, to help. and all that.
It's all inclusive to the 80 million.
Okay.
And it is.
Oh, okay.
And it is.
So it's
not
a part of that?
Yeah, it's not in
Okay.
addition to the 80. It's-
Okay.
But it is a pot of money that is essential that makes this whole process work.
But wouldn't you bundle that contingency if you bundled it, right?
That's the key, because you don't, it might be that, just pick an example, maybe you have some really unpleasant surprises at one of the elementary schools, but things go swimmingly at CTE, you want the ability to just seamlessly be able to move that, take advantage of that contingency without, now I've got to go to the other team and I've got to now change the contract. You see?
Yeah, I just couldn't understand how you could have that on a new project, but, unless it's a rock clause or something like
And a
that.
typical contingency is what?
Well, it depends on which phase. If you end up getting to full design, typically for new construction, it's around 2 to 3%. And in renovations, it might be 4 to 7%. But when you're early, if you're doing, like if you're just basing this off a schematic, if you're getting your price commitments based off the schematic design phase, the conceptual, it might be 10 to 15%, right? But this is all defined, and as time goes along, as more detail is developed, the contingency goes down. It's reduced, and then you end up at this is complicated, by the way.
I'm sure it
Just
is.
really, it is, and how you write the contracts for all this. In the end, when I say the end of the design, you still maintain a contingency for things that could not have been fully anticipated, like rock, or like hazardous materials that might be discovered at an elementary school.
Sure,
Yeah, those are just some
in
examples.
those schools, I get, yeah.
Or on the soft cost. Could it be?
Well, it could be, but usually the soft costs are going to be held on the owner's side
Held on
typically.
that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we do recommend even a soft cost contingency that's separate from what's referred to as the CM or construction manager's contingency, which is what we were talking about, Dr. Maxey. I know it's complicated. It's complicated.
Yes, it is.
Is that contingency usually around 5% of the project cost?
Again, it depends on whether it's a renovation or a new construction, and it depends on which phase of the design you are.
But as you move through design and as you move into construction, those contingencies are absorbed into the project. It's not in addition to the 80 or in addition to the 50. They're part of the same.
Yeah, they're part of the top end.
Yes.
And usually, depending on how the contract's written, if they're not needed, the money is not, it goes back to you, it's not spent.
We have a project here in Danville, 80 million, George Washington High School, PPA proposal. It had a 3.3% contingency, and we haven't touched a penny of it, and we're at 95% design.
Okay.
Now, that's a heavy renovation, additions, quite different than the CTE. But it is quite a coordination, collaborative effort between the designers and the builders along the way to be very clear early on. That's a lot on the architect to provide those documents early on, clearly defined scope. It's not meant for a change of scope, so that's.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, by the way, all of these alternative delivery methods require a lot more work than is typically done early on in the project. It requires an accelerated amount of work early and more stress, candidly, on your team as well.
So one more question, back to that 3.3% or whatever. Does that then go back to the owner if it's not used? Or is that a part of it?
It will depend on your contractual language with the team.
What
Okay.
you negotiate there with them, whether there's a certain reimbursement, 60/40 or none.
Some
It's
use a
it's
shared
negotiable.
savings clause. Some contracts have where you split.
And those are opportunities, but there are also opportunities that we have seen where we've achieved a certain level of completion and construction. The owner feels comfortable, or the contractor feels comfortable with completing the project without any major things coming up, and they may actually then decide to change scope or add scope or say, we would really like to have had this, and sometimes that contingency fund can be used for that as well. But that usually comes much later in the process.
When you're past the risk.
When you're past the risk and you have a comfort level with what you have to complete.
Okay, one final question related to, I guess, because it does concern, I gotta be honest, it does concern me a little bit on the contingency of a new project, but is there an opportunity that somebody would give us an unsolicited bid and say, look, we would start the two elementaries first to give us a little bit more time for the architectural renderings, or?
You need all the time you can get on both projects.
Right.
In our opinion.
Okay.
Not only bundle them, but do them concurrently in order to take advantage of that summer 2026 substantial completion, which in turn helps you
Move
not
the others,
stem
yeah,
across.
no, that's
It-
right.
The specific example of why is just the significant amount of site work that's expected for the CTE project.
Sure.
Just getting that site pad ready is something that you're gonna have to start early.
The other thing is if you create this staggered effect, even if it's one team, you almost kind of start to lose some of the advantages of the bundle.
Okay, yeah, I get that. I thought about that. Yeah, okay.
Let's see, keep moving. Oop, didn't mean to do that. Oh, I guess that was the main points. So we're kind of back to, we'll see if there's any other questions.
And it's just kind of the conclusion of the presentation. And the reason I ask that is, again, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I'd love to ask our two folks that are here, if this is appropriate, if they have any thoughts or items they'd like us to think about, or where we at.
Let them weigh in.
Ooh, that's an open gun.
Well, you know me, I think everybody in here knows I have an opinion. But, you know, I would agree, I think they need to be bundled. I also agree that I think they need to be done concurrently. You know, I've got no doubt that Todd and his folks can't manage through that as well as you guys. I mean, just sitting here listening to this, I mean, I'm leaving with the thought that, I mean, it does make the most sense to bundle them and do them together.
Okay.
The overwhelming question is, that I don't know if you have the answer to, is if you get an unsolicited PPEA proposal, are you going to accept it? Or do you want to put in the work and solicit proposals? That's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the $1,000,000 question everybody in the valley is waiting on the answer.
Yeah. Yep.
And you see Chris laughing. Because that's just it.
We're waiting too.
We're all wondering if we should put in the time and the effort to do an unsolicited proposal, what will happen if it hits your desk? And that's the question.
Well, given timing,
Here's how I see it.
given timing,
I mean,
let me just finish this.
Go ahead.
One thought. Given timing, what would you know what we've got to work with, you know what we want to keep these schools moving. And is it even, and I throw this out because there's a lot of companies probably your size, is it something that an Avis could provide a bid for?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
both of them.
You have the
Both Brains
capacity.
and Avis could.
Well,
Yeah.
some, and so forgive me for not knowing the answer to this, but, you know, because of the scope of the project, I think there's some that probably would have to fall by the wayside, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's why I asked. I didn't mean to insinuate you couldn't. I just didn't know if everybody.
Well, and then,
bonded.
you know, another question, I mean, I'll ask it with Ben here because he may know better than me, with folks who have been on committees for projects and folks who have been engaged currently to provide preliminary design or whatever, are they allowed to even be on a team per state procurement laws? I mean, I don't.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I guess that's a question just to.
Up to this juncture.
I guess the one thing between you two guys, do you have enough people to do the 3 projects, starting them and keeping them going?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. I mean, we just recently finished up a 3-school bundle down in Montgomery County in the last probably 6 or 9 months, right? So it's not that it's something that hasn't been done before. And to get back to what you guys were saying about trying to separate the projects, we're the other contractor working in Danville. And what we see with Danville is that back and forth on the budget, right? Do we have enough money here? Do we not have enough money there? They go back and forth, trying to figure out what that final dollar value is going to be. Same conversation with the contingency. You were asking about some of these new project sites, and if you have to have contingencies. Well, the school we're working on, it is the new school. You know, there is no renovation, but there was a fairly substantial contingency as we started. And as we got through design and got the details worked out, that contingency comes down a whole lot more. So I think the thought process you guys are having makes a whole lot of sense. I think PPEA is probably the way to go. And to bundle projects together, I think makes complete sense. I think one of the biggest things timing wise, that if you don't act pretty quick, you run the risk of not being able to get out there in summer of '24, and that's gonna potentially postpone the completion in sometime in '26, August of '26, right? So I think all those things are kind of lining the stars up to what makes the most sense.
What happens when you contingency and you do this PPEA and you got a certain amount, right? And that's it. And you got a contingency. So y'all been in this business a long time and you know I've got to cover myself to make sure that I don't run short, right? Have you done that in any cases with schools where you've gotten to where, wait, we didn't figure on this?
Yeah, so it's a part of the conversation, right? I mean, it's it's almost like an open book conversation for how you develop that GMP. We're gonna give you details for what it looks like. We're gonna talk about what the risks are, and we're gonna talk about it mutually, whether you own it or I own it or however it works. But that's just part of that process that we go through to be able to identify the risks, understand who's actually gonna take it, and then putting a dollar value to it. But it's part of the conversation, so you don't have to get down to that issue that you talk about now. That's the beauty of going through this process.
The school board's part of developing that contingency. We're
Right.
just not telling you, here's the contingency.
Right.
You're a partner in developing that.
Yeah,
Very
Okay.
good conversation.
That's a
Okay.
good
All
point.
right.
yeah. All of it's very collaborative. It's intended to be very collaborative. It's from once, especially once you make the selection, right? One of the nuances of the design build and the PPA process is these teams form and they're exclusive teams, and their design concepts and their pricing need to be proprietary. They can't be shared. Can't be shared to other teams or to the public.
And I don't think anybody on the board, just to clarify, wants to hold anything up. I think we all want to get this done as quickly as possible. So I think it's safe to say, speaking for everybody, that if we are giving an unsolicited proposal, we are definitely going to look at that very seriously. If that kind of gets that point across. We want to get moving. We don't, there's also fears of the economy falling apart nationwide, different, risks. We want to get this done as quickly as possible. So
Yeah.
I think I speak for everybody in the fact
We're
that
certainly.
And I think you're right, Mr. Chairman, as far as, we got the experts here, we got the experts sitting back there. I know the project that Troy did for Cave Spring, and I know Bryce, does the projects as well. I think that, that they're the experts, and if we go PPEA and bundle it, that's it. Let's move.
absolutely nobody's going to turn their nose up to an unsolicited bid. I can promise you that.
No, absolutely not.
In our guidelines, Mr. Chairman, it says, item 15.2, where it says, for projects deemed a priority by the school board, the portion of timelines related to selection, review, and documentations may be accelerated. How does that play in?
Just a moment ago, I bumped Ben and I said, what about day 46? And what I mean by that is, if you receive an unsolicited proposal and you choose to accept that proposal, you will then ask for competing proposals to be submitted within a 45-day period.
By law, it has to be at
By
least
law.
45.
Got to be 45 days. Ben mentioned earlier, there are typically two phases of a PPEA when it's unsolicited. There's that initial submittal phase, and then you can go on to a detailed phase in which you have shortlisted teams and you've asked them to go into a more detailed proposal. That second phase is not always necessary. To that point in your guidelines, you can, if you can justify it, select your team on day 46 based on your initial proposals, whether that be the first proposal received or one of the competing offers.
Practically speaking, they need a little time to review them carefully. But you have the ability to, if it's clear that you judge that one proposal is clearly more qualified or clearly more advantageous, you can select and go in negotiations for a comprehensive agreement then. If with the kind of interest that this project attracts, it may not be that clear. It may be that you get several very qualified proposals and you can't you don't feel like you can exercise that.
But we have the right to choose which one.
Well, and legally, we define what clearly morally highly qualified means. There's not a legal definition of that. We decide what that means. I've checked that with our attorney.
Yeah.
Well, speaking to Brent's comments, I'm not sure why we wouldn't consider an unsolicited bid.
Well, so if I may, if we were having this conversation a year ago.
Right.
And somebody talked about, well, are you entertaining an unsolicited bid? I mean, because obviously, that's the whole point, I think, where it says, superintendent can say, well, here's what a fee would be, because if you're getting unsolicited bids from people all the time for projects you're not even necessarily serious about, that obviously causes staff a whole lot of time, so that's why you want to, charge a fee for having to review these things and so forth, making a decision that, no, we don't want to do that. So a year ago, we didn't even know exactly what our funding was going to be, what exactly the scope was going to be and all that. So to your point, the way I see it is, the thing we move forward with right now is we've got to get right on working as if we're going to probably do a solicited process. Because in other words, unless we get one tomorrow, we don't know, right? Because that's the whole, obviously by definition, they're unsolicited. So here's my way of thinking, and these guys are the experts again, but we have to get working right away as if we were going to do a solicited, because we got to keep this moving forward. If, however, we were to get an unsolicited, while we're in the process of doing that,
could abandon
and
ship.
I think you're right. There's no reason that at this point we wouldn't, consider that, because they're in essence doing the work for us in terms of putting all that together. I mean, whoever it is, right? That's how I see it.
Yeah, I agree.
So we're clear, everybody knows, we'll be glad to take some unsolicited bids.
All
That is not
proposals.
solicited.
Please don't use the
Excuse me,
term
my-
bids.
Excuse me for my mess up there.
No. Well, the only thing in bold in our guidelines here, under number 6, says the school board's general policy is to reserve acceptance of unsolicited proposals for unusual circumstances, because in general, solicitation of proposals is likely to achieve more fair, open competition. Is that, and that may be a question for legal counsel, but do you think that's a cause of concern?
I don't think it is. I think we have those sort of unusual circumstances, given the need to want to capitalize on those summer months, the fact that we've just now gotten this funding agreement done. I think we've kind of put ourselves in that situation. I mean, not ourselves, but you know what I'm saying? We find ourselves in that situation to where we have some circumstances that would really motivate us and I think easily defend that those circumstances exist.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just for clarification, it says in case of an emergency, a contract can be awarded without competitive sealed bidding or competitive negotiation. When does that happen?
You don't have a true emergency. That's, a hurricane blows the roof off one of your schools.
It's an emergency.
I just thought we'd move them along quicker.
No,
I like your thinking, but I don't know. if you can
and we don't want any
justify it.
hurricanes blowing roofs off.
All right, does anybody have anything else?
Just thank y'all for
Thank you.
coming to do this. Is
You really-
extremely helpful.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Put focus on it, so that really helped a lot. And thank the guys for
Yeah,
coming today.
thank you guys for coming, and Troy's done this one time before too for us. So, thank you so much.
You never want to be hasty, but the reality is every day matters right now.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
We don't know what the
We could,
inflation is headed or not.
That's right.
we could have started this 4 or 5 years ago. No, I'm not.
Here, 15 minutes.
Okay, Tim, enough, Tim, you,
Let it go.
hey,
So-
cut that mic off.
There we go. Okay.
I guess I do have one other question on 2.3, and this may be common with other municipalities you've worked with, but it says entry by the school board into an agreement requires approval by the county board of supervisors. Have you run into anybody? I don't anticipate that being an issue, but have you run into that anywhere?
Not if they were in support of using the PPA delivery method and the budget was already agreed upon. That would be very rare, that it would be a problem.
And the word agreement in that in that instance, capital A is referring to section 9, is when we get to that point, is when you're actually, so you're deciding, yes, this is the group we're gonna go forward with, we're entering at that point into an agreement. That's the part that has to go to the appropriating body.
They have to agree for everything we do right now.
All right.
Yeah. Appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so
Anybody
much.
have anything else? All right, meeting adjourned.
But our work session next week, he does have several things that he's not gonna be here, but he's gonna have Mr. Grimes go over. So just please look over that, because while he's available for questions.
Have you sent it to us?
Dr.